Hello everyone, welcome to this fantastic video made by a fantastic team. Let me first briefly introduce our team members. My name is Minecraft.
I am Michelle.
I'm Carmen.
I'm Christy.
I'm Eric.
Brilliant! This video is based on the report Boosting the Productivity in Sub-Saharan Africa, Policies and Institutions to Promote Efficiency, which illustrates the economic growth performance there and several factors leading to productivity gap and inefficiency. Now wait a minute. Eric, could you turn off the music? Great! Now let's begin. This video mainly contains 4 parts. First, we'll summarize the main content of the report and highlight a few of the more interesting bits of information. Secondly, we'll apply the economic model learned from the lecture to this report to see how our model analyzes the productivity gap in Sub-Saharan Africa. We then critically evaluate our model, focusing on where it fails and its limitations. Finally, we'll make a brief assessment of the macroeconomic policy mentioned in the report to see how effective it can be by using our model. Carmen, could you please give a brief summary of the report?
Sure. This report evaluates SSA's recent economic growth performance through various macro data, and the analysis distinct causes including institutions, policies, and especially misallocation of resources. The main content can be summarized into 4 parts. In terms of the overall growth performance, SSA has failed to catch up with both the global efficiency and aspirational development benchmarks over the past 6 decades. The contrasting evolution of labor productivity in SSA and EAP5 indicates not only differences in the pace of capital accumulation, but also a growing divergence in TFP between the 2 regions. SSA's labor productivity also fell behind 3 major market economies, Brazil, China, and India. Based on our production function, this productivity gap can be of course explained either by low factor accumulation or low TFP. But which one drives more? Well, there's evidence of a shift in the main drivers of these persistent gaps. First, in the 1980s, output per worker differences between SSA countries and the US were primarily driven by differences in the stocks of physical and human capital. Second, disparities in labor productivity between these 2 regions widened in 2010 to 17 compared to the 1980s. Third, TFP differences have played a large role in explaining the gap in relative output per worker across SSA countries over time, implying that the rate of inefficient use of current technologies, attributable in part to resource misallocation, is getting more mileage in explaining the issue. In other words, the problem of low TFP, especially resource misallocation, is burdening in SSA. For the measurement issues, the report provides a clear structure of the data being observed and evaluates their availability, comparability, and quality. Notably, the report states that school enrollment data might be overstated, and we will discuss it later. Last, the report also gives a proposal of developing digital technologies to stimulate savings and investments.
Thank you, Carmen. But here come the questions. You mentioned the physical capital, human capital, technology, misallocation, these sorts of things. But how can we understand these factors by using our model? What does our model tell us about the reason for such a low stock of physical capital in SSA? What does our model tell us about the secrets for growth and development? Apart from that, why is education and increasing saving rate, as mentioned in the report, so important to SSA according to our model? And if possible, to what extent does our model support the statement of overstating school enrollment data? So now let's have a look at the model. Here we choose a solo model which focuses on the accumulation of physical capital. Quickly review, we have a Cobb-Douglas production function, where A can be understood as TFP. We have an investment function and a capital accumulation function. Graphically viewing, we have an output curve, investment curve, and a straight line showing depreciation of physical capital. Remember that the investment function is a curve due to diminishing marginal returns, but depreciation rate is always constant. Thus, there exists a point where they intersect, representing the steady state of the economy. At steady state, investment rate is equal to depreciation rate, which means delta K is 0. Hence, the growth rate is also 0. However, our basic model doesn't consider an important factor, the population growth rate. As most countries in SSA are experiencing rapid population expansion, we improve our model by adding a simple variable n, representing the growth rate of population, to make it more realistic. As a result, our capital accumulation function will change by further subtracting the capital given to new workers from the right side of the equation. The final equation will hence be like this. For the graph, actually everything stays in the same position, except the initial depreciation line, which has a bigger slope now. So what solo model tells us so far? With these variables, we can calculate the steady-state output, and it's clear that output per capita is a function of savings, TFP mainly including human capital, and population growth. Therefore, solo model tells us that the secret to growth and development is basically work hard and save, study hard, and do not have too much sex. Now we need to apply this model to the SSA case. According to the data, the saving rate in SSA is experiencing a persistent decrease, especially in the 1980s. The population is, however, increasing at an increasing rate. According to our model, a decrease in saving rate will move the steady state to the left, hence leading to a lower steady state output and capital per worker. It's easy to understand. Since saving rate decreases, investment at each output level will decrease, so less capital you can accumulate in the long run. Similarly, increase in population growth rate will also move the steady state to the left, since now more capital needs to be given to new workers every year. So far, we seem to have everything sorted out. We now have made it clear that what capital accumulation and TFP stand for in our model, and the data successfully support our model that the increase in population growth rate and decrease in saving rate will lead to a lower physical capital accumulation in the long run. But for TFP, although we know from the report that it has become the most important driver of the productivity gap in SSA, our model lacks the ability to further split TFP into smaller parts. From our model, it supports a statement in the report that a lower TFP will lead to productivity gap, but we fail to further compare the magnitude of the effects of technology, misallocation of resources, and other factors. Among these factors, the most measurable one is probably human capital, where we have the data of primary school enrollment rate in SSA. We can see that the rate is making a great progress in recent years, and the newest figure in 2090 had reached 99.9%. And we know that a nice figure for human capital means a nice figure for TFP, which seems to contradict the facts in the report. So this reminds us of the statement in the report that are there bias in human capital assessment? Are the school enrollment data being overstated? Well, let's think about this question in two ways. On the one hand, from the evidence shown in the report, there's reason to believe that these figures have been overstated to some extent. The average change in enrollment is nearly 1/3 higher in administrative data than in survey data across 21 African countries, and this optimistic bias is completely absent in data outside Africa. On the other hand, if we observe the data from EAP5 countries or even China and India, the enrollment rate in those countries actually largely exceed 100%. Thus, to some extent, the data in our model do not contradict with the facts in the report.
There are several points in our analysis which are worth evaluating. Firstly, we ignore the effects of export as in our production function. We assume that African countries are in a closed economy. Secondly, we did not have much analysis on A, which is a residue in our function. Hence, we were not able to further break A into smaller parts and compare whether the technology or misallocation is having more significant effects on the African economies. Thirdly, population growth is not necessarily equivalent to labor force growth. In our analysis, the population growth N is working as the labor force growth, which is actually unrealistic. Furthermore, our model can only discuss the African economies at an aggregate level, but fails to analyze sectional level or micro-production units level. Moreover, we cannot really control the variables when we focus on the effects of a certain policy, as we do not have access to a so-called parallel universe machine. There is also a concern about our data due to its low availability, comparability, and quality, which are mainly due to the large number of informal sectors and low-quality statistical services in SSA.
Now let's take a look at the policy of introducing digital technologies in banking and finance mentioned in the report. Digital credit has some advantages relative to traditional loans. It is approved more quickly and is readily available to customers without requiring in-person vetting by the banking institution. It makes saving instruments and loan products more accessible for individuals, helping to increase the saving rate. But on the other hand, digital credit also poses some challenges. These loans are not as large and they often have relatively high interest rates, multiple fees, and short repayment periods. In addition, access to credit among women entrepreneurs is more restricted than among men because of inequality in ownership of fixed assets to serve as collateral to secure loans. Finally, cash still dominates the transaction of many of the world's poor, despite the increased use of digital financial services. Therefore, more efforts are needed to foster digital literacy to help potential users understand the interface with digital financial system.
That's the end of the video. Thanks for watching.